The massive doors of Galactic Council Station Harmony 7 slid open with a deep hiss. Commander Vextal stepped through first, his 7-foot frame casting a long shadow across the polished metal floor. Behind him marched 6 of the Corvan Empire's finest warriors, their natural armor plates gleaming under the station's bright lights. Each step they took echoed through the corridor like thunder. These were the galaxy's most feared soldiers. Their claws could cut through steel. Their thick hide could stop energy blasts. For 300 years, the sight of Corvan warriors had made entire star systems surrender without a fight. Today they were here to meet the newest members of the Galactic Council, the humans. Vextal had read the reports about Earth dozens of times. The planet was a nightmare, deadly storms that could flatten cities, temperatures that swung from freezing to boiling, creatures that existed only to kill and eat other creatures. The galactic community had labeled it a death world, a place where nothing should be able to live, let alone build a civilization. Yet somehow these humans had not just survived there. They had thrived. They had built cities, developed technology, and eventually reached the stars. Now they wanted to join the peaceful Galactic Council. The irony was not lost on Vextal. The Council had sent their most dangerous warriors to welcome what they assumed would be the galaxy's most dangerous species. Commander, his lieutenant Kexmore, whispered beside him. The humans are approaching. Vextal looked down the corridor and almost laughed. 3 small figures walked toward them, moving with calm, measured steps. They were tiny compared to the Corvans, barely reaching chest height on the shortest warrior. Their skin looked soft and pale, with no natural armor at all. They wore simple clothes that offered no protection whatsoever. The human in front was a male with dark hair and kind eyes. He smiled as he approached, showing small, flat teeth that looked completely harmless. Behind him walked a female with long black hair tied back neatly, and another male with broader shoulders who moved like he might have some military training. These were the feared Deathworlders. Welcome to Harmony 7, the first human said, his voice warm and friendly. I am Ambassador Hyunwoo Kim, representing Earth and humanity in our first official meeting with the Galactic Council. Vextal straightened to his full height, letting his claws extend slightly, a traditional Corvan greeting that usually made other species step back in fear. The human's smile only grew wider. I am Commander Vextal of the Corvan Empire, he rumbled, his voice deep enough to vibrate through the floor. These are my finest warriors. We have come to evaluate your people's readiness to join our peaceful community. The word evaluate carried weight. Every species knew that Corvan evaluation could end very badly for those who failed to impress. Hyunwoo nodded politely, seemingly unbothered. We're honored by your presence, Commander. Please let me introduce my colleagues. This is Sora Lee, our cultural attaché, and Taemin Park, our military liaison. Sora stepped forward with a bright smile. She was even smaller than the ambassador, looking like she could barely survive a strong wind, let alone life on a death world. It's wonderful to meet you all. We've heard so many impressive things about Corvan warriors. Taemin gave a respectful nod but said nothing. His eyes moved constantly, taking in details about the Corvan warriors with the calm assessment of a professional soldier. This one at least seemed to understand the situation. Your reputation precedes you as well, Vextal replied, studying the humans carefully. Though I must admit the reports about your homeworld paint a challenging picture. Earth can be difficult, Hyunwoo agreed easily. But it's home. We've learned to make the best of it. Kexmore leaned closer to Vextal and whispered in their native language, Sir, are we certain these are the right species? They seem fragile. Vextal had been thinking the same thing. According to intelligence reports, humans had conquered their death world so completely that they were spreading to other planets. They had developed weapons that could crack moons and ships that could cross the galaxy. But looking at these 3 small soft creatures, he wondered if there had been some mistake. Perhaps, Sora said suddenly, we could share a meal together. It's a human tradition when meeting new friends. Food has a wonderful way of bringing people together. The Corvan warriors exchanged glances. As herbivores, they had simple dietary needs, processed plant nutrients that provided everything their large bodies required. Most civilized species had moved beyond the primitive practice of consuming raw biological matter. A meal? Vextal asked. Oh yes, Sora's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. I've been preparing some traditional Earth foods for just such an occasion. It would be an honor to share them with such distinguished guests. Hyunwoo nodded approvingly. Sharing food is one of our oldest diplomatic customs. It shows trust and friendship. We'd love to introduce you to human cuisine. The word cuisine was unfamiliar to the Corvins, but they understood the concept of shared consumption as a bonding ritual. Many species practiced simple versions of it. Very well, Vextel decided. We accept your meal invitation. Taemin spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying an edge that made the warriors pay attention. You might find human food interesting. We eat a bit differently than most species. How so? Kexmore asked. Well, Sora jumped in cheerfully, humans are omnivores. We eat both plants and animals. And we've developed quite creative ways of preparing them over the centuries. The Corvin warriors went very still. Omnivores were rare in the galaxy and usually considered primitive. The idea of deliberately consuming other living creatures was disturbing to most civilized species. You eat animals? Another warrior asked, his voice barely hiding his disgust. Among other things, Hyunwoo replied calmly, as if this were perfectly normal. Our planet required us to be adaptable in our food sources. We learned to eat whatever would keep us alive. Whatever would keep you alive, Vextel repeated slowly. Within reason, of course. Sora laughed. Though human definitions of reasonable might be broader than most species are used to. The warriors looked at each other with growing unease. These small, harmless-looking creatures casually spoke of consuming other living beings as if it were normal. What kind of death world had shaped them into such practical survivors? The dining facility has been prepared, Hyunwoo continued. We've invited a few other human crew members to join us. I think you'll find the meal educational. As they began walking toward the dining area, Vextel noticed how the humans moved. They seemed relaxed, almost careless, but their eyes constantly tracked their surroundings. Taemin's hand rested casually near what was obviously a concealed weapon. Sora chatted pleasantly while maintaining perfect awareness of every Corvin warrior's position. These were not the soft, helpless creatures they appeared to be. Commander, Kexmore whispered again. Something feels wrong about this. Vextel nodded slightly. His warrior instincts were screaming warnings, but he couldn't identify the threat. The humans seemed genuinely friendly and welcoming. Yet something about their casual mention of eating whatever would keep them alive sent chills through his armored spine. What exactly had they agreed to witness? The human quarters on Harmony 7 looked surprisingly normal. Clean metal walls, standard furniture, and the usual life support systems that kept the station running. But as soon as Sora led them inside, the Corvin warriors noticed something different in the air. Strange smells, sharp, pungent odors that made their sensitive noses twitch. Please make yourselves comfortable. Hyunwoo gestured toward chairs that had been modified to accommodate the Corvin's larger frames. Sora has been excited about this opportunity all week. Sora was already moving around what appeared to be a food preparation area, pulling containers and tools from various storage units. She hummed while she worked, completely at ease despite being surrounded by the galaxy's most feared predators. I hope you don't mind, she called over her shoulder, but I've prepared some of my favorite dishes from home. Korean cuisine has such wonderful variety, and I thought you might enjoy experiencing authentic Earth flavors. Commander Vextal watched her with growing confusion. The small human woman handled various containers with casual confidence, opening sealed jars that released clouds of sharp-smelling vapor. His warriors shifted uncomfortably as unfamiliar chemical signatures hit their sensors. Korean? Kexmore asked. A regional culture from Earth, Taemin explained, settling into a chair with practiced ease. Humans developed thousands of different food cultures across our planet. Each region learned to work with whatever ingredients were available locally. Thousands? Another Corvin warrior repeated. How is that possible? Hyunwoo smiled. Earth is a diverse world. Different climates, different resources, different challenges. Humans adapted to survive in deserts, frozen wastelands, tropical forests, mountain ranges, island chains, and everything in between. Each environment shaped different approaches to finding and preparing food. Sora opened a container that immediately filled the air, with a smell so strong that several Corvin warriors took involuntary steps backward. She seemed completely unaware of their reaction as she examined the contents with satisfaction. Perfect, she declared. The kimchi is ready. Kimchi? Vextal asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. Fermented vegetables, Sora explained cheerfully, spooning the contents into a bowl. The mixture was bright red and seemed to move slightly on its own. It's made by encouraging beneficial bacteria to break down cabbage and other vegetables. The fermentation process creates wonderful flavors and helps preserve the food for long periods. The Corvin warriors stared in horror. She was talking about deliberately cultivating bacteria, microscopic life forms that most species considered dangerous contaminants. And she planned to eat the results. Bacteria, Vextel said slowly. You deliberately grow bacteria in your food. Oh yes, Sora nodded enthusiastically. Fermentation is one of humanity's oldest food preservation techniques. We have hundreds of different fermented foods. Kimchi, sauerkraut, pickles, cheese, wine, beer, bread, yogurt, miso, soy sauce. The bacteria break down complex compounds and create new flavors while making the food safer to store. Each word sent fresh waves of shock through the Corvin delegation. These humans weren't just eating bacteria. They had built an entire culinary tradition around it. They had turned contamination into cuisine. Taemin noticed their expressions and chuckled. I know it sounds strange, but fermented foods are incredibly nutritious. Human soldiers have survived for months on nothing but fermented supplies. They're packed with vitamins and proteins our bodies need. Survived for months, one of the warriors whispered. On contaminated food. Not contaminated, Hyunwoo corrected gently. Cultured. There's an important difference. Humans learn to distinguish between harmful bacteria that make us sick and beneficial bacteria that help us digest food and stay healthy. Our digestive systems actually depend on billions of friendly bacteria to function properly. This revelation hit the Corvins like a physical blow. Not only did humans eat bacteria, their bodies were full of them. They were walking colonies of microscopic life forms. Sora continued her preparations, pulling out what looked like chunks of dead animal flesh. She handled the raw meat with practiced efficiency, cutting it into pieces while explaining her process. This is bulgogi, marinated beef. I've been soaking it in a mixture of soy sauce, garlic, ginger, sesame oil, and pear juice for 2 days. The acids in the marinade break down the tough fibers and infuse the meat with flavor. The smell of raw flesh mixed with the sharp chemical odors of the marinade created an assault on Corvin's senses. Their stomachs turned as they watched this small, cheerful woman handle dead animal tissue, like it was perfectly normal. The meat comes from cows, she continued conversationally. Large herbivorous animals that humans domesticated thousands of years ago. We raise them specifically for food, along with pigs, chickens, sheep, fish, and dozens of other species. You raise animals to kill them? Kexmore's voice cracked slightly. It's more efficient than hunting wild ones, Taemin replied matter-of-factly, though humans do that too, depending on the situation. Military survival training teaches you to catch and prepare whatever protein sources are available. Fish, birds, insects, small mammals, anything that won't poison you. The door chimed and 3 more humans entered. Sora's face lit up as she welcomed them. Perfect timing. Everyone, meet our guests from the Corvin Empire. Commanders, these are some of my favorite people on the station. Jinho Choi, our chief engineer, Heejin Song from medical, and Woojin Nam, who handles trade negotiations. Jinho was a stocky man with kind eyes who immediately headed for the food preparation area. Sora, please tell me you made extra kimchi. I've been craving real food for weeks. Real food? Vextel asked. Station rations, Jinho explained with a grimace. Nutritionally complete but completely flavorless. Nothing like home cooking. Heejin, a petite woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, began unpacking a bag she'd brought. I contributed dessert, she announced, pulling out bottles of dark liquid and what appeared to be small brown blocks. Chocolate and soju, a perfect combination. The brown blocks registered as toxic on every Corvin sensor. The liquid in the bottles showed clear signs of being a mild poison. Yet this human medical professional was planning to consume both as dessert. Woojin, tall and lean with the easy confidence of someone used to dealing with different cultures, added his own contributions to the growing collection of food. I brought some of the spicy noodles I've been saving, plus those dried squid snacks from the last trade run. Spicy noodles, one of the Corvin warriors repeated faintly. Oh, you'll love these. Woojin grinned, showing them a package covered in warning symbols that would normally indicate hazardous materials. They're rated at about 50,000 Scoville units. Hot enough to make you sweat, but not so hot you can't taste anything else. The package literally carried biohazard warnings. These humans were planning to eat biohazardous materials for entertainment. Sora clapped her hands together excitedly. This is going to be wonderful. We have kimchi, bulgogi, spicy noodles, dried seafood, chocolate, and soju. A proper Korean feast. As the humans continued their preparations with cheerful efficiency, the Corvan warriors found themselves backed against the far wall. Every item these creatures called food registered as dangerous to their sensors. Bacterial cultures, toxic chemicals, animal flesh, mild poisons, and substances that carried literal warning labels. But the humans handled everything with casual familiarity, laughing and chatting as they prepared what they called a feast. They showed no fear, no caution, no awareness that they were assembling what any rational species would consider a collection of biological weapons. "Commander," Kexmore whispered urgently in their native language, "we need to leave. These creatures are insane." Vextel watched Hyunwoo smile warmly as he helped arrange plates and utensils. The ambassador seemed genuinely pleased to share his people's customs with alien guests. There was no malice in his actions, no threat in his manner, which somehow made it all more terrifying. These weren't warriors preparing for battle or scientists conducting dangerous experiments. These were ordinary civilians getting ready to consume lethal substances as a social activity. They had turned their Deathworld's attempts to kill them into a recreational feast. What kind of species survived by eating poison for fun? The dining facility had been cleared for their use, giving the humans space to set up their feast. Commander Vextal and his warriors watched from a safe distance as the small creatures transformed the sterile room into something that resembled a battlefield medical station. Sora moved with frightening efficiency, arranging containers of bacterial cultures and chemical compounds across multiple tables. She hummed a cheerful tune while handling substances that made the Corvan sensors scream warnings about biological contamination and toxic exposure. "Key to proper kimchi," she explained to no one in particular, "is controlling the fermentation process. Too little time and the flavors don't develop. Too much time, and the bacteria can produce compounds that are unpleasant." She opened the largest container, releasing a cloud of vapor that made several Corvan warriors take involuntary steps backward. The smell was sharp, acidic, and carried undertones of decay that triggered every survival instinct the aliens possessed. "Perfect," Sora declared, examining the bright red, writhing mass inside. "The lactobacillus has done its job beautifully." Jinho looked over her shoulder and nodded approvingly. "My grandmother would be proud. That's exactly the right level of sourness." The engineer began setting up his own preparation area, unpacking what appeared to be a portable chemical processing unit. He ignited flames beneath a metal container and began adding various powders and liquids, with the casual precision of someone mixing explosives. "Bulgogi requires high heat," he explained to the horrified Corvans. "You need to sear the meat quickly to seal in the juices while the marinade caramelizes on the outside." The flames leaped higher as he adjusted the controls. The raw animal flesh sizzled and smoked when it hit the heated surface, filling the air with the smell of burning protein and the sharp chemical tang of the marinade. Jin had claimed a corner table for her dessert preparations. She worked with the methodical care of someone handling dangerous substances, which, according to Corvan sensors, she was. "Chocolate contains theobromine," she explained cheerfully, breaking the toxic brown blocks into smaller pieces. "It's a stimulant compound that affects the central nervous system. Humans metabolize it efficiently, but it can be deadly to many other species." She said this while casually popping a piece into her mouth and chewing with obvious pleasure. "And this," she held up one of the bottles of clear liquid, "is soju, ethyl alcohol diluted to about 20% concentration. It's a neurotoxin that humans consume in controlled doses for its psychoactive effects." The medical professional was discussing poison like it was medicine. The Corvan warriors exchanged increasingly panicked glances as they realized they were watching experts in biological warfare prepare their weapons. Wu Jin had spread his contributions across the largest table. The packages he'd brought carried warning labels in multiple galactic languages, all indicating extreme hazard levels for biological consumption. "These noodles are special," he said with obvious pride, holding up a package that practically glowed with danger symbols. "They're infused with capsaicin extracted from modified pepper plants. The concentration is high enough to cause tissue damage in most species." He tore open the package, releasing vapors that made the Corvan's eyes water from across the room. Inside were twisted strands of what looked like chemical-soaked fiber. bright red with concentrated toxins. 50,000 Scoville units, he continued happily. That's hot enough to make you cry tears of joy. The casual way. He discussed tissue damage and chemical. Burns while smiling made the warriors wonder if they were witnessing some form of elaborate torture preparation. Jin-Ho looked up from his searing meat to nod at Wu Jin's noodles. Good choice. Nothing beats real spice after weeks of bland station food. Remember that time in the Kepler system when all we had were those emergency rations? Don't remind me, Ye-Jin shuddered dramatically. 3 months of flavorless nutrition paste. I thought I was going to lose my mind. That's when Wu Jin started that hot sauce smuggling operation. Sora laughed, stirring her bacterial culture with obvious affection. Trading medical supplies for contraband spices. Contraband spices? Vextel finally found his voice. Wu Jin grinned sheepishly. Most stations classify high capsaicin products as hazardous materials. Officially, they're only supposed to be handled by trained specialists with proper safety equipment. But humans need real flavor in their food. The trader was admitting to trafficking in biological weapons for seasoning. The dried squid is perfectly legal, though, he added, holding up strips of what appeared to be desiccated sea creature. We caught these ourselves during shore leave on Titan Station. Nothing beats fresh seafood. The seafood looked like leather strips soaked in chemical preservatives. The smell suggested advanced decomposition, barely held in check by aggressive salting. Sora began plating her kimchi, the bacterial culture glistening wetly under the dining facility's lights. Each portion contained enough active microorganisms to qualify as a biological weapon by galactic standards. Yet she handled it with the casual care of someone arranging flowers. The beauty of fermented foods, she said conversationally, is that they're alive. The bacteria continue working even after preparation, developing new flavors and breaking down complex compounds. Every day the taste changes slightly. She was describing ongoing biological contamination like it was a desirable feature. Jin-Ho transferred his seared meat to serving plates, the flesh still smoking from its chemical treatment. The marinade had formed a dark crust that registered as potentially carcinogenic on Corvin sensors. Perfect char, he declared with satisfaction. The sugars in the pear juice caramelize beautifully under high heat. Creates compounds that enhance the umami flavor. Profile. He was discussing the creation of toxic compounds like a scientist describing a successful experiment. Shai Jin had arranged her chocolate and alcohol in an artistic display that would have looked at home in a chemical weapons laboratory. The bottles of poison gleamed next to blocks of nervous system stimulant, all presented with the aesthetic sensibility of someone who found beauty in controlled toxicity. For proper pairing, she explained, you want to balance the bitter alkaloids in the chocolate with the burning sensation of the alcohol. The ethanol helps carry the theobromine compounds across the blood-brain barrier more efficiently. The medical professional was discussing optimal poison delivery methods while arranging what she called dessert. Wu Jin had prepared his hazardous noodles in a large bowl that steamed with chemical vapors. The capsaicin concentration was visible as a red oil slick on the surface, and the smell alone was making the Corvin's respiratory systems produce protective mucus. The trick with really spicy food, he said, stirring the toxic mixture with apparent enthusiasm, is building up tolerance over time. Human children start with mild peppers and work their way up to the serious stuff. It's like controlled exposure therapy. He was describing systematic self-poisoning as child-rearing practice. The other humans gathered around the serving tables with obvious excitement, examining each dish with the appreciation of experts evaluating dangerous materials. They pointed out subtle details in fermentation levels, chemical concentrations, and optimal toxin distribution. This looks amazing, Hyunwoo said warmly, surveying the collection of biological hazards his people had assembled. Sora, you've outdone yourself. This is exactly the kind of traditional feast that shows the best of human culture. The ambassador was describing a table full of weapons-grade biological agents as the best of human culture. Commander Vextal realized with growing horror that this wasn't a combat demonstration or a scientific experiment. This was normal. This was how these creatures lived every day. They had turned their Deathworld's attempts to kill them into social bonding activities, and they were genuinely excited to share it with their new alien friends. The moment of truth had arrived. Hyunwoo gestured toward the feast with obvious pride. completely unaware of the terror his invitation inspired in the Corvan warriors. "Please, honored guests, take your seats," the ambassador said warmly. "We're excited to share authentic human cuisine with you." The Corvans approached the table like soldiers advancing through a minefield. Every dish radiated warnings their sensors couldn't ignore. Bacterial contamination, chemical toxins, biological hazards, and substances that should require hazmat suits to handle safely. Sora began serving portions with cheerful efficiency, spooning generous amounts of the writhing red kimchi onto plates while explaining its history. "Kimchi is over 2,000 years old as a preservation technique," she said conversationally, as if discussing ancient art instead of controlled decomposition. Korean winters were harsh, so humans developed ways to keep vegetables edible through the cold months. The fermentation process actually increases nutritional value, while preventing harmful bacteria from taking hold. She paused to take a large bite of the bright red mass, chewing thoughtfully as bacterial cultures swarmed across her taste buds. The Corvans watched in fascination and horror as she showed no signs of distress from consuming what registered as a biological weapon. "The key is maintaining the right balance of salt, time and temperature," she continued between bites. "Too little salt and dangerous bacteria can overwhelm the beneficial ones. Too much salt and the fermentation stops. It's a delicate process that requires understanding how different microorganisms compete with each other." Jinho served the bulgogi with equal enthusiasm, the charred meat still steaming with chemical compounds from the marinade. "This recipe comes from my family," he explained, cutting a piece and eating it with obvious relish. "My great-grandmother survived the occupation years by learning to make tough cuts of meat tender and flavorful." "Sometimes you work with what you have." The engineer was describing survival techniques from some historical conflict, casually mentioning how his ancestors had learned to process inferior animal flesh into something consumable. The Corvans began to understand that human food culture wasn't just about nutrition, it was a record of survival strategies passed down through generations. Taemin had been quietly observing the aliens' reactions throughout the preparation. Now he leaned forward with the careful attention of someone who recognized a teachable moment. "I can see you're concerned about what we eat," he said directly. "It might help to understand how humans developed these food traditions." Vextal managed a nod, unable to look away as Heejin casually consumed a piece of toxic chocolate while sipping poison from a small glass. "Earth tried to kill us in every way possible," Taemin continued matter-of-factly. "Poisonous plants, deadly animals, extreme weather, bacterial infections, fungal contamination. Everything on our planet seemed designed to end human life." He took a bite of kimchi, showing no reaction to consuming the bacterial culture. "So humans learned to fight back. We couldn't make Earth less dangerous, so we made ourselves more adaptable. Every food you see here represents a victory over something that wanted to kill us." Wu Jin nodded, twirling the hazardous noodles around his utensil. "These peppers evolved capsaicin to prevent mammals from eating them. The chemical burns mouth tissue and triggers pain responses. Most animals learn to avoid them after one experience." He took a large bite and immediately his eyes began watering. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his face flushed red. But instead of showing distress, he smiled with genuine pleasure. "Humans decided we liked the challenge," he continued, his voice slightly strained but cheerful. "We bred the peppers to be even hotter, then developed recipes to showcase the burn. Pain became flavor." The Corvan warriors watched in stunned silence as this human continued eating substances that were clearly causing him physical distress. He was experiencing tissue damage and interpreting it as enjoyment. Hyejin noticed their expressions and laughed, raising her glass of alcohol in a mock toast. "Wait until you learn about drinking culture," she said before taking another sip of the clear poison. "Humans discovered that controlled doses of neurotoxins produce interesting psychological effects. So we developed hundreds of different ways to poison ourselves recreationally." She gestured to the bottle with scientific precision. "Ethanol disrupts neural pathways, impairs motor function, and can cause permanent organ damage in large quantities. But in moderate doses, it reduces social anxiety and creates feelings of euphoria. Humans have been deliberately consuming it for over 9,000 years." The medical professional was discussing recreational self-poisoning like it was a normal social activity. Sora had finished her kimchi and was reaching for more, completely unbothered by consuming billions of living microorganisms. The wonderful thing about fermented foods is that they're alive and constantly changing. The bacterial cultures continue working in your digestive system, helping break down other foods and producing vitamins your body needs. She was describing her digestive tract as a bacterial cultivation facility. Jinho cut another piece of bulgogi, the meat's surface glistening with caramelized marinade that registered as mildly toxic. "Military rations taught me to appreciate real cooking," he said conversationally. "When you're deployed in hostile environments, you learn to eat whatever keeps you alive and functional. But when you get home, you want food that reminds you why survival was worth the effort." Yanwu nodded thoughtfully. "Human food culture is really about adaptation and community. We took everything that tried to kill us and turned it into ways of bringing people together. Shared meals create bonds between individuals and families." The ambassador gestured to encompass the entire feast. "Every dish tells a story of humans refusing to be defeated by their environment. We didn't just survive on a death world. We learned to find joy and beauty in the struggle." Taemin's expression grew more serious. "Understanding human food culture is understanding human military capability. We're not just omnivores. We're opportunistic consumers who can derive nutrition from almost anything organic. Human soldiers can survive in environments that would starve most species." The military liaison was explaining how recreational eating translated into strategic advantages. "Emergency. Rations are designed to be consumed by humans for indefinite periods," he continued. "But in truly desperate situations, human troops have sustained themselves on local flora and fauna that would kill most galactic species. We call it living off the land." Wu Jin had finished his noodles despite the obvious chemical burns they were causing. His face was flushed and streaming with protective fluids, but he looked satisfied and happy. "The best part about spicy food," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead, "is that it triggers endorphin production. The body's response to pain creates natural euphoria. Humans learn to weaponize our own neural chemistry for pleasure." He was describing systematic self-torture as entertainment. The Corvin warriors finally understood what they were witnessing. These weren't just survivors of a death world. They were a species that had turned survival into an art form. They consumed poisons for pleasure, cultivated dangerous bacteria for flavor, and deliberately inflicted chemical burns on themselves for social bonding. And they were sharing this knowledge freely, genuinely believing they were offering friendship and hospitality. Commander Vextal realized with crystalline clarity that the intelligence reports about humans had been completely wrong. They hadn't just conquered their death world. They had made peace with mortality itself. They were the most terrifyingly adaptable species in the galaxy, and they considered it perfectly normal. Hours had passed, and the human feast showed no signs of ending. If anything, the consumption of toxic substances seemed to energize the small creatures rather than debilitate them. Commander Vextal watched Jinho laugh until tears streamed down his face while eating noodles that were literally burning. His mouth tissue, the engineer was experiencing pain-induced euphoria and treating it as entertainment. "The best part about really spicy food," Jinho gasped between bites, "is the rush you get when your body thinks it's dying, but you know you're perfectly safe. It's like extreme sports for your digestive system." He was describing recreational self-harm as a hobby. Sora had moved on to explaining the finer points of alcohol fermentation to Hye-jin, discussing different bacterial and yeast cultures with the enthusiasm of someone comparing weapons systems. "Rice wine uses koji mold to break down the starches," she explained, pouring another glass of the clear poison. "The fermentation process can take months, and the alcohol content depends on how long you let the microorganisms work. Some traditional methods produce concentrations that can blind you if you're not careful." She was casually mentioning permanent injury as a side effect of beverage preparation. Wu Jin had produced what he called acquired taste items from his personal stash: dried fish that smelled like decomposition, fermented bean paste that registered as a biological hazard, and pickled vegetables that had been soaking in acid strong enough to dissolve metal. "These are century eggs," he announced proudly, unwrapping objects that looked like they belonged in a toxic waste facility. "Chicken eggs preserved in alkaline clay for months until the proteins break down into completely different compounds. The yolks turn green and develop a cheese-like consistency. The preserved eggs looked like biological weapons. They smelled worse." Wu Jin bit into one with obvious pleasure, while the Corvin sensors screamed contamination warnings. Tiemann had been sharing stories from military survival training, each anecdote more horrifying than the last. The worst assignment was jungle survival in the Amazon basin, he said conversationally while consuming bacterial cultures. Everything there wants to kill you, plants, animals, insects, even the water. But humans lived there for thousands of years, before modern technology. He described it like it was normal for intelligent beings to deliberately place themselves in environments designed to kill them. The key is understanding what's actually dangerous versus what just seems dangerous, he continued. Many things that look terrifying are actually safe with proper preparation, and some things that look harmless can kill you in minutes. The military liaison was explaining how humans had developed expertise in biological warfare through trial and error over millennia. Hyun-woo noticed the Corvins hadn't touched any of the food and leaned forward with genuine concern. I hope we haven't offended you with our selections. I know human cuisine can be intense for species that aren't used to it. The ambassador was worried about cultural sensitivity while surrounded by enough biological weapons to sterilize a space station. Perhaps you'd prefer something milder, Sora suggested helpfully. We have some simple rice dishes that are much less aggressive, although... She paused thoughtfully. Rice preparation involves controlled starch conversion through heat treatment, and we typically season it with fermented soy products. Even the mild options involved chemical processes and bacterial cultures. Chai Jin had moved on to what she called digestive aids, small bottles of liquid that glowed with an ominous phosphorescence under the dining facility's lights. These are traditional Korean herbal remedies, she explained, measuring doses with scientific precision. This one contains compounds that stimulate gastric acid production to help break down complex proteins. And this one has alkaloids that promote intestinal bacterial diversity. The medical professional was administering controlled doses of bioactive compounds as casual supplements. Human digestive systems are remarkably adaptable, she continued. Consuming one of the glowing liquids without apparent concern, we can process an enormous range of organic materials, partly because we co-evolved with thousands of different bacterial species. Our gut flora includes organisms that can break down compounds that would be toxic to most species. She was describing humans as walking biological processing plants powered by symbiotic microorganisms. Jin-ho had finished his dangerous noodles and was helping himself to more of everything, mixing different chemical compounds with the casual experimentation of someone who had built up immunity through repeated exposure. You know what I miss most about Earth? He asked rhetorically, combining fermented vegetables with chemical-treated meat. The regional variations in spice tolerance. Korean food is spicy, but try Sichuan cuisine from China, or ghost peppers from India, or habanero dishes from Mexico. Every human culture found different ways to make eating into an extreme sport. He was describing a planet-wide tradition of competitive self-poisoning. Wu Jin nodded enthusiastically. And that's not even counting the really dangerous stuff. Fugu preparation in Japan, where one mistake with the knife work can kill everyone at the table. Casu marzu cheese from Italy, where you eat it while the maggots are still alive. Surströmming from Sweden, which smells so bad it's banned from most public spaces. The trader was listing foods that required specialized training to avoid fatalities, and he spoke of them with obvious fondness. The amazing thing about human food culture, Hyunwoo added thoughtfully, is that it reflects our relationship with risk and community. Sharing dangerous foods creates bonds between people because you're literally trusting each other with your lives. The ambassador was explaining how mutual exposure to biological hazards functioned as a social bonding mechanism. Sora had begun preparing what she called dessert tea grain, a brewing process that involved steeping plant matter in boiling water to extract alkaloids and other bioactive compounds. Green tea contains caffeine, which is technically a neurotoxin, she said cheerfully while measuring leaves. But humans metabolize it well, and the stimulant effects help with digestion after heavy meals. Plus, the antioxidants help counteract some of the more aggressive compounds we've been consuming tonight. She was describing recreational drug use as a digestive aid. The Corvin warriors had pressed themselves against the far wall, as far from the biological hazard buffet as the room would allow. Their sensors were overwhelmed by the constant stream of contamination warnings, toxic substance alerts, and biohazard notifications. But the humans showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, they seemed to be enjoying themselves more as the evening progressed. The alcohol was having its intended neurological effects, making them more animated and social while their systems processed an incredible array of chemical compounds. Taman looked directly at Commander Vextal, with the calm assessment of one warrior evaluating another. "I think our friends are beginning to understand human capabilities," he said quietly. The military liaison had recognized the exact moment when the Corvin's perception shifted from confusion to horror to genuine respect. These weren't primitive creatures who had accidentally survived a dangerous world. They were apex predators who had turned their planet's attempts to kill them into recreational activities. Every human child grows up building tolerance to substances that would hospitalize most galactic species, Taman continued. We start with mild versions and work our way up to the serious stuff. It's not just about food. It's about conditioning our bodies to survive anything. He was describing systematic preparation for biological warfare as normal childhood development. "Commander," Vextal finally found his voice. "Your entire species does this? Eats food?" Jinho looked genuinely confused by the question. "Well, yes. Everyone needs nutrition." The engineer was so accustomed to consuming biological weapons that he couldn't understand why it might seem unusual to other species. Hyunwoo's expression grew more serious as he recognized the deeper implications of the question. "I think what the commander is asking is whether all humans are capable of this level of biological adaptation." He gestured to encompass the ongoing feast of controlled toxicity. "The answer is yes," he said simply. "This is how humans live. Every day on every human world in every human culture, we eat things that try to kill us, and we've built our entire civilization around the practice." The most terrifying part wasn't what the humans were doing. It was how completely normal they considered it to be.